Number 1. Yeller. When I first moved out of my parents' house, which seems like it was so long ago now that I'm bringing it up, I went north to Wisconsin. It wasn't much further away, since I was in Illinois, but there is still a very significant feeling in the difference of how cold it is. So my first winter in Wisconsin was a pretty bad one when it came, and I just had absolutely no idea what to have expected. At the time I was 19, and I didn't go to college. I, in fact, moved to Wisconsin to be close to a friend, and I had to get a job at a retail place. And I would ride the bus to and from work. But walking from the bus to my apartment that winter was hell. I didn't mind it so much when it was snowing, but the freezing cold was a completely different matter. There were times when it was skin-biting. Not having a lot of money, I also didn't live in the best part of town. It was definitely nowhere near as nice as where I grew up. But even though it wasn't the greatest place to live in, I had a nice long walk from the bus station, but I never had a problem or anything. I don't think there were gangs or anything in the area. I just think it was a very poor area economically. Anyway, this was the day in December. It was somewhere around Christmas time. I remember being in the store and it was really slow, so it might have been right after Christmas. It was a long time ago, but I guess that's not important. It was snowing pretty hard on this day. I appreciated the fact that I didn't have to drive in it, but I knew I'd have to walk through it for a while. It was really heavy, heavy snow. When it did come around, I went out in the snow and waited for the bus. Visibility was really, really bad, and the bus happened to be a little late. It was going to be very slow moving getting home. I noticed something odd as we were getting close to my stop. There was a guy walking along the sidewalk. I could barely make it out, but it looked like he was carrying a gallon jug of iced tea in his hand, and he was yelling stuff while swinging the jug around and around. He looked at the bus when it went by, and he was yelling at the bus. It seemed like that at least, but I couldn't make out anything he was talking about. It was not long after that when I got off the bus when we got to my stop. I stepped off into the snow, which I can still feel my feet sinking into the snow. I can still hear that weird crunching sound that it makes when you step into the fresh snow, breaking the surface of the snow for the first time. And although there was the howling of the wind in my ears, it only took a few moments before I heard the noise of that guy who was yelling. I quickly looked behind me, back into the falling snow. He was there. I could make him out even though it wasn't the best view. Visibility was still pretty bad. I decided to just walk on ahead and do my best to ignore that guy. I turned onto another street and figured that would be the end of that. I could still hear the guy yelling. I could still not completely understand what he was yelling, but I could absolutely hear him. I turned around instinctively, like you do whenever you hear something behind you, and I noticed that he turned on the street that I was walking on. I was slightly alarmed. I didn't think he was following me, but he was walking a little faster than I was. I didn't want to have to interact with him in any way. He was just too weird. So I tried to pick up the pace. I had to turn on several streets to get to the house I lived in. It was a house with 2 flats, me living in the bottom one. I turned on another street and gazed back at the guy when I turned. He was still yelling things I could not understand, and I was getting more and more nervous still. But it was nothing like when I noticed that he once again turned onto the street that I had turned onto, and he was still walking faster than I was. Part of me was convinced now that he was coming after me. I had no idea who he was though, so I doubted he knew me either, but that was of little comfort. Being followed by someone you don't know is much, much scarier. And so it went on. He turned on all the streets that I was turning on, and he kept gaining on me while he was also yelling his strange yelling. But really, it wasn't important. The only important thing at this point was getting into my house, out of the snow, and away from this strange yelling guy. So I kept walking, trying to pick up the pace. I just knew that I would feel better once I got into the house. When I got down the street and closer to my house, I tried picking up the pace even more and sprinting into my yard. I had that fear, though, that you have, that once you start running, you're going to start being chased. But I didn't think about it until I got out of the snow and into my house, and then I locked the door. I was happy to finally be away from that really weird guy. Before I did say anything else, I turned around and looked out of the small window that was in the door. I was shocked when I immediately watched the guy had turned into my yard and was walking up toward the house. He was still shaking that jug of iced tea around and yelling things. It was the realization that I was indeed being followed that was first shocking. I thought it had just been my paranoia. "Hey, open up that door," the man yelled when he got to my porch. "I need you to open up your door right now." He was shaking that jug of iced tea at the house, which was so weird to me. "Hey, I live here. Open up that door," he kept yelling. Of course, he didn't live in either flat, but him claiming that he did was just very weird. "Open up that door. I need to get inside." I didn't know how to respond to this. All I knew was this was weird as hell, and I couldn't pretend not to be home. He was behind me when I walked into the house. I didn't know how deranged someone had to be to try and get into your house and claiming that he lived there. I told him I was not going to open the door, and when I did, he began pounding on it really hard. He kept yelling at me to open it, and I was getting more and more scared. "I am going to call the police if you don't get away from my house," I yelled at the guy. He kept pounding and pushing on the door. He was a big enough guy that I was a bit afraid that he was going to knock it down. I was getting really scared and went over to the phone to call the police. I was worried if they would be able to get there in time. The guy was truly doing a number on the door. And that's when it stopped. But rather than quiet, there was more yelling outside. It sounded like a second person was out there arguing. Heading back to the window, I noticed that the guy who rented the other flat in the house was out on the porch. He was arguing with the guy who was trying to get into my place, and it seemed like they knew each other. I heard the yelling and was able to make out a little bit of what they were shouting. I had already called the police, but finally, it seemed like the neighbor chased the guy off. And when he did, I went out and told him about calling the police. I found out that it was just a very weird coincidence. Before I moved into the flat that I was in, that neighbor had lived in it with the guy who was following me. I guess the guy got kicked out, and then my neighbor switched to the other flat. I don't know. It was a long and weird story. Apparently he kicked the guy out for doing bath salts, and that gave me a chill, wondering if he had been on them that day. I don't know, but he sure was acting weird. Number 2. Truck. I didn't learn to drive when I was in high school like most people do. I didn't have any interest in it at all. When I got my first apartment, which was in the same town I grew up in, I mostly started taking the bus everywhere. Either that or I walked around in town, because that is where I worked. But I got into an argument with my manager and walked out one day. I tried finding a job that I could get to on the bus or in walking distance. The job that I found, I could take the bus to most of the time. But at least one day on the weekend, it did not run. So for a while I was walking, and even riding my bike every now and then. For a year or two, this was just how things were. But when I was 22, I decided it was finally time for me to learn how to drive. The one weekend day was murder in the winter when I couldn't ride my bike because the road was too slippery. It was a 5-mile ride, and in the winter, it snowed so hard that it was difficult to ride the bike to and fro. I got my driver's license in the fall, right before any winter storms hit. My parents gave me a little Isuzu truck. Of course, at this point, I quit riding the bus and was driving back and forth to work every day. One of the inconvenient things, though, is that now that I was not confined to the times that the bus ran during the week, I was taken on different shifts every now and then. So a few times I was getting home really late at night. So on the night that this story takes place, I was working one of those late shifts. I was probably not going to get out until after midnight. I was told that there was going to be a snowstorm when I got into work. It made me a bit scared. It would be my first time driving in the snow. And where I lived, the snow got very, very heavy, especially on the first fall of the year. The snow began falling after sunset, and it was supposed to be a very heavy snow. I guess that and the combination of it being the first snow really hurt business that evening. I remember a lot of employees being sent home early because not enough customers were coming into the store. For the last few hours of the whole thing, we didn't even get a single customer into the place at all. A lot of that time I spent in the dining room of the restaurant, looking out the window as the snow kept falling and building up and building up. And the plows were out, but they were barely making a dent into the heavy snowfall that was piling up on the road. Well, then it finally became time to run home. I was feeling really scared, so I had nothing to expect as far as driving. I don't know much about the truck, but it was a small truck, and it didn't take a long time until I discovered the fact that it wasn't great for driving in the snow. It kept skidding over and over again, I suppose because it was so small and such a light truck, and it skidded several times. It took everything I had as a new driver to just keep it on the road, and it didn't work. About halfway home, I had a horrible skid, and the truck went right into a ditch, and the road was pretty abandoned. I put the truck in reverse to try to get out of the snow, and did all that I could do to try and put it back on the road. I did everything I could, but I could not get that car out of the ditch. I got very frustrated very quickly. A car or two passed by and they didn't stop to offer me any help. But after some time, someone did finally stop. But it wasn't the most pleasant experience. The guy was kind of scary looking, and he told me that he would help me pull the car out for $50. I let him know I didn't have that kind of money to spare, but I thanked him for the offer anyway. Strangely enough, the guy decided to help me for free. It was a bit of a surprise, but not an unpleasant one. After we'd got the truck out, I thanked the guy, but then he actually told me that I had to pay him the $50 for helping. I told him again that I didn't have that sort of money to spare, and his response made me realize what I had said wrong. "You may not have it to spare, but you obviously have it," he told me. "You can give it to me now, or I can put both your truck and then you into the ditch." I was sort of shocked, but really didn't know how to react. I told the guy that he just misunderstood me and I didn't have any money. When I did, he walked back over to his truck. I figured he was just going to leave, but what I watched was him reach into the bed of his truck and pull out a tire iron. He then started to walk in my direction. I then jumped into my truck as quickly as I could. This guy was freaking loony. I tried to pull away from him as quickly as I could. He smashed the tire iron up to the side of my truck. I did my best to skid away. The tire iron then caught my driver's side window and smashed it as well. I got hit with shattered glass. The glass was scary, but not nearly as bad as thinking that I might get caught. As I pulled away, he hit the bed of my truck again, but I finally got some traction and I was able to get away. I thought that the guy might follow me, but if he did, I did not notice. I managed to get back to my apartment complex and got into my apartment with no problem. I had to put something over my window to keep it from getting snowed in, but I decided to clean the glass up later. I had no way to check on the guy or find out who he was in any way. The positive thing is that I never came across him again. Number 3, trick or treat. Before my parents got divorced, my mom used to always take us out to trick or treat. After the divorce, as my mom didn't have enough money to support us, my dad got custody of me and my older brother. He was always busy working or otherwise feeling sorry for himself, so on Halloween, he did not take me and my older brother out trick-or-treating, and my brother got bored of it much earlier than I did, so after a year, if I wanted to go, I had to go by myself. I'm really not complaining, don't get me wrong. I really didn't actually mind going out by myself. But I was pretty young and not really that big of a guy, and so I was depressed after the divorce, and I kept to myself. I hadn't made many friends, so I tended to spend a lot of time by myself. Being how I was given a hard time by some of the other kids. I don't want to go into anything as far as saying I got bullied, though. I never really got into fights or really felt threatened by the other kids around me and at school. But I didn't exactly fit in with them or get along with them either. On Halloween of the year this happened, I was 11 years old. My older brother was 14, and I can't exactly remember what he was doing that night. My dad, however, I could tell you was asleep on the couch. He hadn't bought any Halloween candy, and had planned to leave the porch light off so trick-or-treaters would not come to the house. I always thought that was a pretty lousy thing to do, but not much I can say or do about that now. I live by myself, and nowadays, I always buy a lot of trick-or-treat candy, and I tend to give several pieces to every kid who comes to my door. But the absolute weirdest thing ever happened. We were hit by a snowstorm really early in the morning. I had never experienced a snowstorm on Halloween before, and it snowed hard, and they canceled trick-or-treat for that night. And that was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. I'm just kidding. I was pretty disappointed about not getting to go out trick-or-treating, but it was also pretty neat to have such a strong snowstorm so early in the year. I went up to my room and watched television and watched out of the window as the snow constantly fell outside my window. I got up at one point and went to the bathroom. As I was walking back into my room, I saw someone standing in my bedroom. Now, I had my lights off. I was watching somewhat scary things on television, but there was definitely someone in my bedroom and right by my bed. But whoever it was only stood there for a quick moment. They then really quickly crawled under my bed. I stood there for a moment, and at first I just assumed it was my brother playing a Halloween prank on me, so I asked him to stop it, but there was no response. So I asked him to get out from under my bed, but there was no response. The third time I asked, I heard something behind me. "What are you telling me to stop doing?" I jumped when I realized my brother was behind me, but I told him that someone was in my room and had gotten under my bed. My brother flipped the light on. He then went over and looked under my bed, but when he got up, he told me that there was no one under my bed. I insisted that there was, and assumed maybe him and a friend were playing a prank on me. When I went to look under the bed, I expected him to grab me and scare me, but none of that happened. When I looked under the bed, there was nothing there but a few toys. I swore up and down to my brother, I swore up and down to you, that I did indeed see someone in my room, and I did indeed see them go under my bed. My brother believed me, actually, and suggested it was something that he called a shadow person. I don't know what it was. I was 100% sure what I did see, though, and I still am to this day. It was scary as hell sleeping on my bed that night. I kept expecting whatever it was to crawl back out. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.